Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy Thursday. I hope everyone is doing well. And if you are watching this live, I would love for you to give me a little wave and a what's up in the comments. Also, if you're watching this on the replay, do a hashtag replay in the comments so that I know you saw it. Also, if you have any thoughts or questions about what I've talked about, definitely put it in the comments and I'll get back to you with answers or further conversation. I'm also available in the private messenger, so send me a message there if you have any questions about what I share today. So I'm just going to give it a minute. I've got my little fur baby Knox joining me today. He loves just laying around wherever I am. Does anyone else have an animal or a dog that just wherever you go, they follow you? Bathroom, bedroom, kitchen. You know, he's the 65-pound huge dog and he just wants to be at my feet. And I love him. We've had him for 11 years. So he's up here just snoozing. All right, so I'm going to get started. Today we are talking about the birth planning process and why it's important. So there's a common misnomer or norm out there that having a birth plan is pointless because you can't actually plan birth. I don't disagree with the latter part of that statement. You can't plan or know exactly how it's going to go. Definitely agree with that. However, the part I don't agree with is that the birth plan is pointless. The birth plan and the process of creating the birth plan are incredibly valuable. And today I'm going to share with you why and give you some guidance on how to get started. If you are watching this for the first time, I am Rachel Hutchins. I am a certified childbirth educator through Lamaze. I'm also a birth doula. I've been serving birthing families since 2014. I am a mama to 2 young boys that if I'm not here serving birthing people, I am hanging out with them. I also love being outside, hiking, yoga. I love dark chocolate and peanut butter ice cream. It's my favorite. Can anyone else relate? Especially if you're pregnant. When I was pregnant, I ate peanut butter and ice cream every night the last few weeks of pregnancy. Just saying. So I feel you. Okay, so I want to start with sort of an everyday scenario. Maybe every day. We don't all travel every day, but I want to ask you about major life events that you have planned for. You've spent money planning for, you've spent time planning for, you gathered other resources, you talked to other professionals or family members about what they've done. Other major life events might be high school graduation or college graduation, might be your wedding, might be your honeymoon after the wedding, your baby shower. How many of you are spending a lot of time on planning for your baby shower? Buying a house. That's a good example. Takes a lot of time and research, and you need to pay a professional to help you. You do a lot of time looking into where you want to live and doing that research. And even if you're renting, even if you're not buying, making that move, committing to that, all the things it takes to make that move happen takes a lot of time, effort, and energy, right? Another thing might be a vacation. So either a long weekend away or a couple weeks going somewhere, far away. A vacation is a great example. And I want to go a little bit further with that and how it applies to the birth planning process. So imagine you want to go somewhere. Do you just drive to the airport without knowing where you're going or without a ticket? I don't know about you. I live in Atlanta and it's a huge airport. You can't even get to the airport without knowing what airline you're flying on. They have different terminals based on the airline you're on. So if I'm okay, I'm just gonna hop in my car and drive to the airport, as soon as I can't even get to the airport without knowing what airline I'm on. So if you're planning a vacation where you're flying, and you're going to the airport, do you go to the airport without your ticket that you've purchased? Do you go without knowing what city you are flying to? Right? Do you go without knowing what airline you're flying on? And how did you choose that airline? Did you choose the one that you feel safest flying on? Did you choose the one with the best snacks, right? Best food options? And then when you get to the airport, do you have your bags? What did you pack in your bag? Did you know where you were going? So did you pack the right things in your bag? Are you checking your bag? Are you carrying it on? Did you bring food with you? Because is it a long flight or a short flight? If you're flying, they usually offer like pretzels. Do you like pretzels? If not, did you bring your own snacks? All of that is part of planning a vacation. Usually, most people walk through all of those things and take into consideration what they want, where they want to go, how much they want to spend, what's safest, what location is best, what they want to pack, all their preferences, all their, I don't know about you, but when I travel, I like to have the things I love the most and that make me feel great. So I'm packing my comfortable PJs, I'm packing my cute shorts and shirt if I'm going somewhere warm, which if I'm traveling, I'm going somewhere warm. So I know that most people who have planned a vacation have taken into consideration all of these things. Asking for recommendation, maybe even hiring a travel agent to help them, weighing pros and cons, really doing the research. So I share that with you because I am thinking about how I wanted to talk about this with you guys today. I wanted to give a real life example and kind of remind you of all the things that you possibly have planned for in your life and how birth and pregnancy or pregnancy and labor and birth and the postpartum require just as much, if not more, time and effort and energy and money and planning so that you can have the best birth available to you. So the postpartum too, that requires a lot of consideration. I talk a lot about birth prep and pregnancy, but also the postpartum. I want you to keep that in mind too when you're going through this planning process, because the postpartum is something that takes most people by surprise, and so I want you to consider that as well. So the process of creating a birth plan has value and is important because what it does is it walks you through all the possible variations that might arise, all the things that could arise. I'm going to speak primarily about hospital birth because that's where more interventions happen. That's where, it's really important that you understand how the hospital where you are birthing does things so that you can weigh and consider your preferences. So I have an in-depth workbook that goes through all the things from triage to after the birth and walks through a sort of, if this happens, what are your preferences? So some people don't want to do a birth plan because they're like, well, I'm just gonna roll with it. And or they're gung-ho on a certain type of birth. Maybe they want to go unmedicated and they don't want to consider other options because they're so focused on having an unmedicated birth that they're not going to consider other variations and other options because they want to stay focused. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think positive thought has positive impact for sure. But part of that is considering all the possible variations so that you are prepared when things arise outside of normal. So I talk a lot about what's normal, safe, and healthy, and then how to identify and address issues as they arise. So part of that's knowing, like when you walk into the hospital, what are they going to do to you? What are they going to ask you? Where are you going to go? And when you get there, what do you want? How do you want to feel? So I think about every time I'm going to walk you through a few examples, but I want you to always be considering, how do I want to feel during this whole process? And if you want to feel safe and comfortable, then you're going to need to be an active participant in this process. And you want to consider each of these things so that you can express your preferences so that you are treated in a way that you want to be treated so that you can have the birth that you desire. So some examples of where you want to explore available options and then your preferences include like routine interventions. So this varies from hospital to hospital, but common routine interventions, and when I say that, what I mean is that they are doing these interventions to everyone. So without you expressing that you don't want them, they will offer them to you or do them to you. So one is IV fluids. So they just want to set you up automatically on IV fluids with or without you being dehydrated. And a lot of times it's pitched in the just in case event, just in case you need it. And it's really hard to decline something that it's like, well, just in case there's an emergency, don't you want to already be hooked up to an IV? Most people aren't going to decline that. However, if you're staying hydrated beforehand, you haven't had a super long, arduous pre-labor where you're exhausted and dehydrated, you're going into this healthy and ready to go, then you do not need IV fluids. So IV fluids, you're tethered to, so there's a bag, it's hanging from a stand, it's in your arm, you're now tethered to something else. So that's a common intervention that they might offer, and that you can, so some options are to not get the IV fluid, to get a hep lock so they can put it in your arm, but then like seal it off so that you're not tethered, but yet they have access to the vein in case you need it. So that's an option, like that's a good compromise. Where they put the IV, do you want it in your dominant hand that you're using, or do you want it maybe in your left arm? I'm saying that because I'm dominant, right? So you can choose where you want it. Do you want it under like here, or do you want it on top of your arm? Wherever you feel more comfortable is where it should be. And if you don't want it, you don't have to get it. So that's just one example of like, oh, there's options. Cool. What are my options based on where I'm giving birth? And what are my preferences based on how I want to feel? Am I okay having the IV fluids? Am I okay being tethered to the bed? I talk about, freedom of movement and being active during birth is going to help you have a smoother, faster, easier birth. So just take that into consideration when you're choosing interventions that restrict movement. So another example of a common routine intervention is continuous fetal monitoring. So all the research and evidence shows that continuous electronic fetal monitoring doesn't actually improve outcomes. So this, again, I'm speaking to healthy, low-risk pregnancies here. So if there are reasons you need to be monitored, this does not necessarily apply. So continuous fetal monitoring is when you have two straps. You have these elastic bands that go around your belly, and they measure the contraction and they measure the baby's heart. And they will hook you up to that as soon as you get into triage, which is the very first place you go when you arrive at the hospital. And that is something that when you first arrive to the hospital, if you've chosen a hospital birth, is necessary. They need to get a baseline to see where baby's at, but you should really only be on like 20 to 45 minutes so that they can get a good reading. And then you can come off those monitors and do intermittent monitoring with like a Doppler. But again, that's not routine. Routine is hooking you up to the monitors, which involve you either needing to be close to the bed or laying in the bed. Best case scenario is you can sit next to the bed with the fetal monitors and like sit on a yoga ball and maybe lean over the bed so that you're using gravity but yet still being monitored. So if you need to be monitored, there's still options. Again, conversations you want to have with your care provider to know what they do. So continuous fetal monitoring is a common routine intervention, one that if you explore available options for your care provider and hospital and know what your preferences are with what you want. Again, how do you want to feel? Do you want to be moving around? Do you not want to be restricted to the bed? Do you not want these big itchy things constantly needing to be adjusted on your belly? If that's the case, then you would want to explore other options and make sure you advocate for yourself and say, you know what, as long as baby's good, we can do intermittent fetal monitoring. And just to reiterate, the evidence does not support continuous fetal monitoring for healthy, low-risk pregnancies. And once they've checked on the baby and everything's good, it's not necessary. It does not improve outcomes. You can do intermittent fetal monitoring and have a really positive experience that's safe and healthy. Other things would be like lying in the bed or lying on your back. I'm going to back up real quick. So for fetal monitoring and IV fluids, just a reminder, if you're walking in knowing you want an epidural, those come with an epidural. So you will have to be having IV fluids and you will have to have the continuous electronic fetal monitoring. So again, if you want to avoid those things, then the conversation would go into like avoiding or delaying an epidural. But just know that those are all connected and that they typically create a bit of a cascade of events, one needing the other. So I'm a big advocate for avoiding or minimizing unnecessary interventions that will help you have a safer, healthier birth. Some other things that might be assumed that you will do is birth on your back, lie on your back during labor or during pushing. And that is not evidence-based either. You should move in a way that feels good, even if you have an epidural, even if you need to be in the bed for monitoring. You can assume all kinds of positions that work for you. So following your body, using gravity, being open. But unfortunately, a lot of hospitals don't always support freedom of movement during labor and especially during pushing and the delivery. The common position is that supine, lying on your back, maybe curled up position with the feet in the stirrups and the provider kind of down there ready to catch the baby. That position was created to at the convenience of the doctor, of the care provider. So really what you should be giving birth in the position is one that you feel good in, and usually using gravity, being in a upright or gravity neutral position, moving around even during pushing, changing positions. All this is going to help the pushing stage be shorter and move along smoothly and easily. So when you know that helps move things along, being forced to lie on your back is something you can say, I don't want to do that. You can say, I don't want to do that. That is not what works for me. Again, unless there's a medical, really the only reason you need to be on your back is if your blood pressure is rising and too high. Lying flat helps keep your blood pressure down. Otherwise, up and moving around. This will help all kinds of benefits for during labor. Other things that would be on the birth plan, part of the process. So I want to highlight here that just those 3 interventions I just gave and some variations there and some options, I want to remind you that those are what would be included on your birth plan. So first you want to know what the hospital, what their protocol is, and then what your preferences are, and then have a conversation with your care provider and then put it into a birth plan. So that you know what's available to me, what is my provider supporting, and if they're not supportive of you having a birth plan or you having these preferences, that's a little bit of a red flag, and I would encourage further conversation and or switching providers to one who's like, yes, I support your preferences, or at least support the conversation to get to a common ground where your needs are being met. So other things I'm about to just sort of list through are part of the birth plan that you would create, but more importantly is the process of considering each of these, evaluating and learning about available options, and then the risk and benefits to each, and then considering how do I want to feel, so what choices am I going to make so that I feel the best during my birth, right? Because it's still your birth. So this isn't saying don't choose an epidural. It's saying if I want an epidural, these are still my preferences within getting an epidural. So other things would be induction or augmenting the labor. So sometimes if labor has started and it is slowing or stalling, they might talk about speeding it up. And usually this is just due to failure to be patient or failure to wait. So they might offer to break your water or give you a little bit of Pitocin, which causes contractions, which would in turn speed up labor. I like to remind you that if labor is going slow or it has stalled, it's usually for a reason. Getting up, moving around, changing positions is best instead of just trying to force it along. Sometimes that time is necessary for a baby to get into a better position to then be born. So just trust that and know that if the words like failure to progress or prolonged labor, the time frame for that is pretty long, upwards of 20 hours for a first-time mom. So, and that's for active stage. So birth can take a long time. And sometimes in a hospital setting, they want it to go faster because they want to move things along and see things happening instead of just being patient. So just knowing what's normal, what's normal for the first stage, second stage, third stage, all of that can help you have a healthy perspective so that when they're like, hey, let's speed things up, let's break your water, let's give you Pitocin, cause those contractions to go. You can say, well, we really haven't waited that long. Let me try some positions. Let me try some different things. Let's wait an hour or two and then see. So things to consider. Other things that would be on your birth preferences plan would be like pain management. Like, do you want an epidural or not? Do you want to delay getting an epidural, right? Wait until that 6 centimeter mark, which is preferred, so that it doesn't slow your labor down. Do you want to, are you okay with intravenous pain meds, which can be offered sometimes if you're in a lot of pain before doing an epidural? That's kind of a gateway to an epidural. They usually maybe take the edge off, help you rest, but they don't really take away the pain. The best thing for pain besides an epidural, epidurals are effective, but if you want to be moving and active, is to just keep moving and stay active. It'll shorten the length of your labor. It'll help with pain. But if you do get that epidural, just know the risks and benefits. Know how to labor in bed with an epidural. There are ways to stay active. You can use a peanut ball lying on your side, big stack of pillows between your knees. So many options. So if you want that epidural, I want you to know the risks and benefits, and I want you to know how to labor safely so that you can have so that it doesn't slow things down, so that you don't have an increased risk of a cesarean. So consider all those things and then weigh that into your birth plan. So do you see where each time I've brought up something, there's all these little bits of information, and when you look through a list of what's on a birth plan and you're like, well, I don't know what that is, or I don't know what the options are, ding, 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 that's a sign you need to dive into it. And this is how you learn about available options, learn about what you want, express them to your care provider, and have a more empowered birth experience. Again, having a birth plan doesn't mean I'm going to control it. Having a birth plan doesn't mean I want an unmedicated birth. Having a birth plan means I give a darn about how this goes. And I care enough to look into and weigh out all the options that I know about, and to know that if X happens, then Y. And obviously the goal is like to have labor go and go smoothly and not need interventions and not have issues arise. And that does happen, right? But in a hospital setting, sometimes more interventions come up because you're being medically managed most of the time. So being aware of that and then knowing your options will help you feel great no matter how your birth unfolds. Because instead of it being like all of a sudden your birth's being hijacked by the care providers because all of a sudden they're wanting to do all these things to you and you don't know what they're doing, and they usually pitch them in a way that you choose what they want you to choose, and that kind of insinuates fear or that you're risking safety of the baby. And so if you know about the available options, you can ask questions more effectively, you can advocate for yourself, you can use your voice, and the birth planning process does all of this for you. It doesn't say, oh, I'm going to go through all this work and it has to go a certain way. The birth planning process says, I'm going to educate myself about this incredible process that is, for most of us, hasn't happened before, or maybe it's only happened once before. It's a big deal and a lot happens. And for you to have the best chance at having the best birth available to you, I really encourage you walking through each of these things. Other things that you would consider would be your environment. Do you care if, do you want the lights dimmer? Do you want access to your own pillow and your own gown? Do you want to bring in some electric tea lights to set the mood? Do you want to play your own music? Do you want to bring your own maybe essential oils? Whatever it is in the birth environment. So remember, you're the consumer. You're going in to a hospital room to give birth, but that doesn't mean you can't create that space in a way that makes you feel safe and comfortable and private and confident. I want you to hear me when I say that. You are the consumer. You are in charge of those elements, and you have a right to them. I'm not saying the hospital where you're giving birth will be fully accommodating, but knowing that you have options and knowing that you need to have these conversations now will help you feel better when you show up to the hospital. You'll be like, yeah, I know what's going on. I know what to expect. I've had these conversations. So I'm just making sure I'm not having technical difficulties. So again, reiterating the process and how important it is. Other things that you would want to consider are cervical checks. You don't have to have your cervix checked during labor. Did you know that? You don't have to. Your cervix is not a crystal ball. It does not tell you when your baby is going to be born. I think there is some thought out there that checking, if you feel like pushing, sometimes people support checking to make sure you're fully dilated so that you don't end up with a swollen cervix. That is something that I think is could be something you would consider. But a lot of times people assume that vaginal checks are necessary and that they have to do them. Again, you might want your cervix checked throughout labor to know what's going on. But just remember, if you do want that, A, it's your choice, and B, it doesn't tell you when you're going to have your baby. It just is a piece of information that says that maybe progress is happening. So when you arrive at the hospital and you're in triage, they will want to check you. I think this is also to make sure like things are progressing and that you're actually like labor is happening before they admit you. You can still decline that cervical check, but they might have to wait a little bit longer before admitting you. Some variables there. Again, talking to your care provider about and the hospital about sort of protocols for when you arrive at the hospital, and knowing that if they offer a cervical check, you can decline. Especially if your water is broken, you have an increased risk of infection. The more hands that are around and in your cervix. So keeping that in mind, that's an option. Other things to consider after the baby's born is cord clamping, so delayed cord clamping, waiting for white, skin to skin, breastfeeding, and newborn care. So all of these I could like keep talking about, but I want to respect your time and I was trying to give a few examples, and those are some more things that you would want to consider, and those aren't even all of them. I have an extensive workbook that sort of walks you through all the things and then all the options so that you can really consider your ultimate preferences and then combine that into a 1-page, very simple birth plan, like a written birth plan. If you want. If you don't want, that's fine. I just still encourage the birth planning process. The written birth plan is great for a few things. It's a great communication tool with the staff at the hospital. So you might have your care provider who you've seen, or at least the same practice throughout your pregnancy, but you don't really know the nursing staff or who you're going to see at the hospital. So having a few copies of your written birth plan or typed up birth plan to give to them, and doing it in 1 page, keeping it simple. I've got a great little template. It's an effective communication tool. It really lets them know I am here. I have a voice. Have some preferences, but I'm going to be firm and flexible. That's my favorite phrase. Like, you don't have to go in there saying it has to be this way, my way, or the highway. And sometimes nurses and doctors see birth plans as this like a rigid thing. And I would just always be emphasizing, I have preferences, but I also can be flexible, right, within my preferences, because I understand birth is not linear and there are variations, but it's like I still care about how this goes and I still want to be respected as the autonomous, decision-making, independent birthing, capable birthing person that I am. Other things, part of the process, once you've gone through that sort of workbook process and evaluated all the things and you've got your birth plan, is going to your care provider, your doctor or your midwife, and going through all those things that you have sort of done some research on your own, and then you want to talk to them to see how they support it. And you want to do this before the birth, right? You want to have a chance to have the conversation with them, because they might be like, no, like I don't support any position besides lying on your back, or, I don't support X, Y, or Z. And then you can decide, okay, do I care enough about this to switch providers, or can I keep having this conversation with them to see if they can get on the same page with me? I've had a client who was determined to keep the same provider, but that provider originally was resistant to some of her ideas, and she just kept talking. She just kept having conversations, and she helped the provider kind of learn some things, and it really sort of evolved and ended up being a really positive birthing experience, because the provider was receptive after she was like, no, like what you're saying doesn't align with what I want and what I know to be true, so can we keep talking about it until we're both sort of in agreement? That can be really empowering, to go through that act of like expressing what you want, asking questions, having an open conversation, being firm and flexible, and then getting to a positive outcome. That whole process is super empowering, and it sets you up for how you're going to care and parent after your baby. Sorry, just hit my elbow. After your baby's born, that same process applies to postpartum care, newborn care, and how you care for your baby beyond the newborn phase. So it's a really cool exercise, and I did it. I was fortunate enough to go through that with my first, and it really helped me learn so much. Like, I remember for me, the first time, part of the birth plan was what happens to the baby like right afterwards, and there's like a Hep B vaccine, and they do like a vitamin K shot and some of these other things. I was like, what's a vitamin K shot? Like, I had never heard the term. My care provider hadn't talked about it. And she was like, go look into it, right? And she told me a little bit about what it was, but she wanted to encourage me to kind of do some research on my own, or take a childbirth education class where they talk about all of that stuff. And that's how I learned. And I was able to make a decision about what I wanted for my baby based on what I knew in conversations with my doula and care provider and childbirth educator. Y'all, it takes all of these conversations and it takes all this effort to really have a positive experience. And I hope you hear me say that it's not about doing it right or wrong. It's about understanding that, like other major life events, it takes time and effort and energy to prepare for it. So the other thing is, so once you've considered your preferences for your ideal birth plan, I want you to then consider the variations. Like if I end up needing a cesarean, right? Like I've done all these things to avoid a cesarean, and now I'm to the point where I need a cesarean. Cesareans can be life-saving. They are needed in about 10 to 15% of births. So if I get to the point and I need a cesarean, what are my preferences for a cesarean? You know, I've had mamas who don't really want to talk about that because they're like, well, I don't want a cesarean, so I'm not going to give that any energy or conversation or thought. And I'm like, but you might need it. And we can't guarantee that you won't need it. And if you have thought about your preferences for a cesarean, you'll feel better about it and less traumatized and less disappointed because you're going to know you did all the things to avoid it. And then if you need it, you will have thought about and considered your preferences. So did you know with a cesarean, you can have preferences too? So I also encourage doing a cesarean birth plan, keeping it separate, tucking it away in your hospital bag, and only bringing it out if you need a cesarean. And again, there are preferences there. There are options. There are ways to make you feel better and safer and more confident and empowered through a cesarean as well. So that's one variation. Like, so we can have our ideal, our primary birth plan, but then then we have kind of plan B over here, and we've thought through it and walked through what that might look like and figured out what happens at our hospital, what's available. A common thing that I like to see for a gentle, family-centered cesarean is the clear drape. So most of the time it's like a blue drape and you can't see your baby being born. But you can do a clear drape and see your baby coming out and being born and see them. You see them before anyone else. And that's amazing. But not all hospitals have clear drapes, or most people don't even know that that's an option. So that's like one little example. And the other thing I want to re-emphasize is the conversation with your care provider beforehand. Also calling up your hospital and talking to the charge nurse there and asking questions about how they handle things. So you might have the hospital and the care provider, and you're getting most of your information from the care provider, and they know kind of how the hospital works, but sometimes the hospital is its own entity and the care provider just works there. So I like to gather information from the care provider as well as the hospital as far as understanding their protocols and what you can expect, and that'll help you be fully informed. The other thing I want to share with you is included inside of my childbirth prep course is an extensive birth plan workbook. It is multiple pages, and it kind of says, okay, if these are your options, and then risk benefits, and then you can kind of select what your preferences would be, your ideal preferences, and then I include a template, like a one-page template that you would just plug your information into, and boom, you're done. And that's part of my birth prep course. It's included, and then I do a whole class on kind of diving deeper on this. We talk about all the different variations of normal within labor, all the possible interventions, how to prepare for a cesarean if that's what you need. So all that's included in my course. Tomorrow is the last day to sign up for the next 6-week session. So we begin next Wednesday, March 3rd. We meet one time a week via Zoom for about an hour, trying to do the small bites approach. Between classes, you get one-on-one support from me via Voxer, which is a walkie-talkie messaging app. It's awesome. I love using it to communicate with my clients. And it'll really, if you have questions or want to talk further about a certain topic, you get me in your phone one-on-one, and it's my voice, and I'm available all the days between class. And then we gather, like I said, via Zoom for about an hour once a week. There's a course companion workbook. It's about 75 pages, full of bonus information. I also have a few other goodies, birth affirmations and guided visualization that I include in the course. But the most of the value is in our weekly Zooms, and then the support in between. So that birth planning process is included in that. We go deeper You get the workbook, you get the template. So if that is at all something you're interested in, please let me know. I'll send you the information. It's also posted in this group. I'll put the link in the comments of this video. And like I said, tomorrow is the last day to register. I'm going to close that registration so that I can start getting everyone ready for class to begin next week. If this stirs something inside of you, if you are curious about how this can serve you better, if you have more questions, please put them in the comments. Please feel free to send me a private message. I want to be here for you. I want to help you have what you need to have the best birth available to you. And thank you for listening. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.